office. So it's great to see you. And I keep thinking, wow, I'm going to get a chance to meet a lot of you in person because a lot of us haven't had that pleasure yet. So I want to make sure that we have a chance to do some introductions, and I'm hoping we might have some new electeds based on our November 2021 elections. So that would be fantastic, and want to give an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do at the Consortium of Cities as well, and then go through the agenda that I'll ask my fantastic staff member, Mark Rusin, who's here with our Commissioner's Office, to help with the agenda in the chat when we get going here. So I'm going to start out with the introductions, and if I miss somebody, please don't be shy, and I'll try and manage that piece, and then I'll do a quick introduction as well, and then we'll get going. So we'll start with, let's see here, let's start with Lions, and I've got Trustee Rogan, but I don't know if there's anybody else from Lions, so I'll let you kick it off.
Hi, thanks. Hi everybody, Holly Rogan. I'm a trustee for the town of Lions, and I'm flying solo for Lions tonight.
Great. Thanks for joining us. What about Louisville? Looks like Rob?
Yeah, hi, good evening. I'll let Kyle go first here.
Excuse me.
Oh, no worries. I'm Kyle Brown, council member here in Louisville, and let Rob introduce himself. Sorry about that.
Yeah, good evening, Rob Zuccaro. I'm the interim deputy city manager and planning director for the city.
Great, thank you both for joining us. Let's go to Boulder. Councilmember Lauren Folkerts.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lauren Folkerts, and I'm newly elected council member for the city of Boulder.
Welcome, congratulations.
Thank you.
And good evening, Ryan Hanchin here with the city of Boulder as an engagement specialist. Now I'll turn to my colleague.
Good evening, Ana Silvia Avendaño, and work as a grant specialist and racial equity ambassador for the city of Boulder.
Thank you all for joining us. Let's send it out to Broomfield.
Devin Schaff, council member with the city and county of Broomfield.
Thanks for being here with us. What about our trustees in Superior?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Lish. I'm on the Superior Board of Trustees, and congrats to all of you who are either re-elected or newly elected. Good to see you all again.
Thanks for joining us. Town of Erie. We'll start with Gabby.
Well, we were hoping to have a trustee or two on the call today, but I don't see them quite yet, fingers crossed. But I'm Gabby Ray, Director of Communications, and with me today is Alberto. You'll hear from him a little later. I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself real quick and your title. It's new at Erie.
Thank you, Gabby. My name is Alberto de los Rios, and I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager for the town of Erie. And this one here is Maddie.
Great, thank you for joining us. I think I've got everybody there. Mark, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure, thank you, Marta. Good evening, everyone. Mark Rusin. I work in the Boulder County Commissioner's Office, head up their policy team, and do a variety of other tasks for the commissioners.
Thank you. And my name is Martha Lochmin. I'm a District 2 Boulder County Commissioner, live in Longmont, and so I'm glad to see you all here. We're always graceful in the Consortium of Cities, so folks who join us and jump in and jump out, will give folks another opportunity to introduce themselves a little later. And so our meeting agenda, we start at 6:30. We'll be done by 8:30, if not a little earlier. We also take a break right in the middle. We'll try and do about in the middle, so you can fill your beverage or eat your dinner, or take care of whoever you need to take care of in your location at that moment. So just to kind of do some planning. Thank you, Mark, for putting the agenda in the chat. We've done our introductions, and as we've done all year, we have in the beginning of 2021, we virtually got together and talked about really using the Consortium of Cities as a working group, and chose some topic areas that everybody felt like they could learn more about, they could share about, that we could really engage with each other with the purpose and the goal of collaborating, learning from each other, and hopefully really using each other as resources for community topics that are on a high level affecting all of us. And as we learn and do more work, we can do more together and hopefully leverage some of that. So that is how we have set up the Consortium of Cities. I'm really honored to be able to lead this work. And when we talk about multiple projects, I think it was Mark who just mentioned one of the projects. So Mark is my staff support person for this particular committee. So thank you everybody for joining in. And as you've got new electeds in your town or your city, we have reached out to everybody to find out when those formal appointments will be, and some of them are later this month. And so we may have some other folks joining us based on that as well. So I want to first give folks an opportunity to give any comments, updates. If there's an event going on in your town that you want to share out, we encourage everybody, you can use the chat, and let's not be remiss to give folks our contact information. We can't make assumptions that everybody, one, gets that introduction. Two, some of us have never met in person, even our own entities. So how would we have phone numbers and contact information? So feel free to use that chat. As we go through our presentations tonight, our topic is about community equity. And one of the reasons that we chose those broad topics was because from our mountains to our plains to our cities, different topics mean different things, and people are doing different types of work and are in planning, and some of us have really elaborate work already happening. And so how can we learn from each other and work together? So I want to give folks first a few minutes to any activities that are happening that you want to share out and let the rest of us know about. And if you've got websites or links to those activities that you want people to share on their social media, let's be collegial, let's be collaborative. And I know Town of Lions has something coming up this weekend. So Holly, if you want to share about it, and then we'll go around, and feel free to raise your hand either virtually or like this, and we'll call on you.
Sure. Saturday is the Town of Lions annual winter parade, and I don't know if any of you have come, but there are actually most of the people in the parade live in town. So there's virtually nobody watching the parade who lives in Lions, because we're all in it. It's a super fun, family-friendly event. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the fireworks for obvious reasons, but it's going to be super fun. So come on out and say hi to Santa, et cetera, et cetera.
What time is your event, Holly?
I believe it's at 5.
Okay.
But I will double check and I'll put it in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Who else has some events coming up?
Well, not to compete with the Town of Lions or the Town of Erie, but Louisville has our parade of lights this Friday as well. Starts at 5:30. Santa, fire trucks, marching bands, you know, where it'll, I think, Rob, is it going to go down Main Street this year, or are we doing it somewhere else?
Yeah, I believe we're going to go down Main Street this year since the street's open. Yep.
Cool.
Well,
So,
ours is on Saturday, Kyle, so you can actually hit 2 parades in one weekend.
excellent. See, I was thinking, thank you, Town of Lions, for coordinating with us on that. So.
Great, thank you.
Well, to continue that coordination, I'll slide right in the middle of those and give something for everybody to do on Saturday morning. So we, this past year, approved a agreement to enter into a sister city agreement with the town of Kanbari, Nepal. And we are hosting the first ever bazaar here in Superior at our new community center, and a portion of all proceeds will go to our sister city project. So I just put all the details into the chat, but if you haven't had a chance to come check out the town's brand new community center, this would be a great event to come and check it out at.
Great, it sounds like we need a bus to take electeds from event to event. Who else has something to share? It looks like there's a few there in the chat as well, so great. And if you think of something else, feel free to raise your hand and share it out. Great. All right. Well, we will, let's see here. We'll move on. I guess I didn't officially call this meeting to order, but I hope that everybody took that "let's get going" at 6:31 as an official order. So let's talk about a couple things. I want to just give a chance to talk about previous meeting topics. If there was anything specific that people wanted to get back to that had notes on and or questions about, feel free to bring that up, and we'll talk about that here for a couple minutes. Otherwise, unless there was something specific, Mark, that you had received emails about or inquiries about. Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, Devin.
Thanks. Is this time for the community ARPA planning, or is that next?
That'll be next.
Okay, perfect. I'll hold off.
Perfect. I think we can go that direction. Why don't you jump into your question and we'll move to the community ARPA.
Yeah, definitely. So we just got an update yesterday on the ARPA funding for Broomfield. And one of the cool things that our staff is putting forward is a community bus. And the idea is that this is kind of a mobile way to get services out into our community, just to build upon the kind of the library model that's been used for decades now. The idea that there's a mobile library that gets library services, but we're really looking at it as a way to build upon the work that we've had with the pandemic. We've had mobile test sites, we've had mobile vaccination sites. Now we'll continue to build upon that with health and human services, recreation, makerspace activities, and so continuing to build on that. We asked about it last night whether or not this was going to be an electric bus, and our staff said yes. So this may very well be our first electric bus, so very exciting. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Great, thank you. And I want to give a chance for our trustee Harrison to do an introduction.
Hello there. Sorry for being late. I had to pick up my daughter at soccer practice. I'm Ari Harrison. I'm Board of Trustees for Erie. I work with Alberto and Gabby, and they make me look good, so I appreciate all their help. But looking forward to learning more about everything that's going on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, and no apologies necessary at all. And we'll continue to let folks do quick introductions if anyone else jumps in as we're midway through our meeting. We're talking about the ARPA piece right now, and I do want to give just an update for folks for what we're doing here at Boulder County as well. Some of you know that we did a community engagement process to address and give community members throughout Boulder County an opportunity to tell us where they feel like that $63.3 million for the Boulder County specific allocation should be spent. That process of engagement is complete. The survey is done. We had more than 1,500 survey respondents come in and had a facilitator and their team put those together. And the outcomes came out as really the top 3 priorities. And that group met in a public meeting. It's on the website, bouldercounty.org, if folks are interested in hearing a little bit more about that. But what I will tell you is that we are now, starting today, actually December 1st, there is an application process for folks who may want to participate over the next 3 months in working groups dedicated to those 3 themes. The first one is economic challenges. The second one is housing affordability. And the third one is mental health and social resilience. So I would love to talk with you more if you have some interest in that. If you've got a city staff person that you really want to have focus on one of those working groups, we will, and you are welcome to and invited to join, and I'll put my email in the chat as well. On Monday, December 6th, at, I believe it's 9 a.m. and I can check too and put that in the chat. I'll host another one of our monthly meetings that we've been having with mayors and city staff, city managers. Everybody's kind of had somebody jump in and participate just to learn more, with the hopes that all of you will use that report with survey data that comes from Boulder County residents. So if you haven't received that report yet, I can get that out to you. We just got the Spanish language translation of that report back yesterday. So all of those resources, again, everything has been on the website, will continue to be updated on the website. As all of you know, if you're receiving and accepting ARPA funding, there's some significant federal guidelines to follow through the entire process since August 31st, when that first federal requirement came about. So that's just an update on where we're at. And I think we certainly share some of those 3 topics, or just shared issues throughout the state of Colorado and certainly in the communities. But did a really inclusive and outreach project to get to that information. So I hope you all use it and feel free to ask questions, etc. So I'll put some of that information in the chat. But that's where we are in our next step. And so phase 2 will then, we're putting the working groups together. Those working groups will be recommended to the Board of County Commissioners on December 16th. We are going to formalize those groups on December 17th and start working on January 10th in a myriad of different ways to give hopefully allocations based on where folks feel like that money needs to be spent in co-designed projects, programs, whatever it ends up being by the end of February. So that's our plan for that $63.3 million. And of course, some of that money's already been spent, as you know, for immediate funds, working with our resource centers and clearly with public health as the global pandemic continues. So that's my update. If there's questions, happy to respond to them. Otherwise, I'll put that other information in the chat. Would love to hear from anybody else who has updates around what they are doing with their ARPA funding, if there's pieces that you want to share. All right.
I'm happy to share what we'll be doing with it. I believe one of the stipulations from the federal government with this funding is that it could be used for infrastructure projects, including water infrastructure. We have a significant amount of expenditures that are required at our water treatment plant. So we are actually using these funds to help fund those expenditures, and it's not going to cover all the expenditures that we'll need to put in, but it'll certainly make a big dent for the community, and will help ensure that we don't have to increase rates to cover any of these expenditures that we'll have to make.
Great, thank you. I think it's helpful for us all to know where is the money going to be spent, what's being considered, because community members need to know how are we going to do transformative change. And if you look at the COVID, the guidelines for the ARPA money, there are very specific equitable outcomes that we are all working towards to be able to receive those funds. Great. I put the information in there for that meeting on Monday morning. So if anybody hasn't received that invite, don't be shy, just let me know and I can add you to my Outlook calendar. Good. All right, so let's get to and I realize I did go a little bit out of order, so I apologize about that. Here I said, here's the agenda, and then I moved in different orders. So let's get to we already did our sharing of upcoming community events, but let's move to our meeting topic. And as you know, typically each city or town who's either sent over information to Mark and let him know that you've got a presentation. Some of you sent the presentations over for us to manage, and otherwise we'll give you a chance to share your screen and or just present your information. And tonight we're talking about community equity, whatever that means to you and your teams, your leadership teams and staff, et cetera, for your community. And I want to give folks an opportunity. Mark, I might just give you and have you call out who's going to start first, because I know we've got at least 2 presentations, but you may have gotten notice of more.
Louisville and Erie are here, and Boulder are all here ready to present. You could do virtual rock, paper, scissors if you wanted, or go reverse alphabetical order or something like that, whichever you all prefer. And then Boulder County has a presentation as well.
I think reverse alphabetical order seems great.
Okay.
Unless someone else has another method. Does that work for you, Councilman Member Brown? Okay.
Sure. Yes, I was actually trying to remember which cities that Mark had just mentioned and whether we were last in the alphabetical order. But either way, maybe I should go back to grade school with my children. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the equity work that we've been doing, and you'll forgive me for not having a formal presentation tonight, but I just wanted to talk at a high level and also give Rob an opportunity to talk, because I know we've sort of been we've sort of approaching equity, diversity, and inclusion in Louisville kind of in two different ways. And the first is with a sort of a council sanctioned task force that we created back in this spring of this past year. And that came on the heels of some community conversations that we had in 2020 about equity and diversity inclusion and how we as a community of Louisville could do a better job of being inclusive and equitable and welcoming, both to our citizens, our residents, but folks who might want to start a business here, and similar. So we created a task force, and the charge to that task force was really around sort of making recommendations to City Council related to equity, diversity, and inclusion in Louisville. And just to talk a little bit about it, we really wanted the task force to focus on providing these recommendations with respect to the community, and specifically focusing on BIPOC members of the community and other marginalized communities. I will say that we did sort of an unusual thing for us, which was we opened it up to people for participation from people outside of Louisville. We thought it would be very important for us to get perspective of people who might either work here but not live here, or might have thought or be thinking about starting a business in Louisville. What are the barriers? What is the perception of Louisville from sort of outside the community, since that is really part of the goal that we were trying to really address here. And so we had a number of members of the task force that were from outside Louisville. Most of the folks who participated were from within, but we hired some really excellent consultants who helped us to design a task force with a really race forward approach, for lack of better words. Really thinking about what is the sort of makeup of Louisville, and how can we hear from the right voices about the sort of Louisville experience when it comes to BIPOC members of the community. So they met a number of times over the past year, and they just concluded their work. It was we wanted it to be this initial phase where we would hear from the task force, and during that their work, they set up different focus groups that from other community members. They reviewed community feedback. They discussed and interpreted prioritized community needs, and they shared their own lived experience. And I was one of the members of the council who sort of interviewed, along with our consultants, members of the task force, and that lived experience was very powerful and was very meaningful, I think, in shaping the recommendations that they came up with. And so they distilled all this down with the help of the consultants into a report and a presentation that they gave to council here recently. And they identified some key priorities, 5 different key priorities. One was a safe and welcoming environment, as well as language justice, public accommodation and access to services, housing, youth engagement, and public health. I'll say just a moment about youth engagement. We were fortunate to have folks really that spanned the spectrum of life experience in Louisville, including a member who was in high school currently, and then folks who were retired. So I feel like we captured a really good number of perspectives on Louisville, not only from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, but also from different sort of age ranges, if you will. They recommended, so those were sort of focus areas. They really wanted to focus on creating a safe, welcoming environment and including language justice and the public accommodation and access to services initially. And they had some proposed sort of short-term actions for the community and for the council. One was to create an EDI manager or deputy position among our staff. And I was interested to see that Erie and Alberto is on with us tonight. And so Erie is apparently ahead of us on that one. So congratulations to Erie. But we'll be considering that recommendation, obviously, in Louisville. To make this task force or something like it a permanent city commission, to create more social programming, music and events that reflect diverse communities in Louisville. And our cultural council has been moving in this direction. We had a number of, I think, really exciting and diverse opportunities over the summer, but I think that continues to be a recommendation, obviously, from this task force, and to provide something that we haven't traditionally done, which is to provide all city resources and communications in Spanish language, and to hire bilingual staff, and then to do more to create safe space, including flags for various cultural identities, and the pride and transgender flags. And so this would be sort of an outgrowth of some of the work that we've done in previous last 2 years since I've joined council, celebrating Pride in Louisville, and Juneteenth, and some other holidays as well. So there's more to be done. I think they had recommendations around creating guidelines and protocols and trainings to help city service providers become better equipped to help those who might face language barriers. We talked about, they recommended that we work to ensure a dignified and equitable treatment of all residents and guests, regardless of their economic status, race, and language needs, and to really focus as well on understanding the guidelines and laws surrounding ADA compliance and how to access ASL services. So to make sure that we are as inclusive in that of folks who might have differences of ability in that way. So we've got a lot of work, I think, ahead of us as council. We are stepping into our planning session, our work planning session here for the coming year. We do a work planning kind of for the council every year here about this time of year, set sort of priorities for staff and for council for the coming year. And I know that the city council is very interested in taking up these recommendations and thinking about how we can implement them. So that's I think some of the public facing work, the community facing work. Rob, did you want to say anything about some of the work that you all have been doing at the staff level as well? Because I think you have a really good insight into what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. And so the city this last year did have 2 parallel processes going. We had the EDI task force that Kyle just went through and explained. And, within those 5 focus areas, I'm counting, I think we have 47 potential very specific actions that we can consider, and Kyle touched on a lot of those. But at the same time, we did an internal organizational assessment with a different consulting group focused on EDI, and we had a lot of listening sessions and focus groups of staff, and worked with the consultant to come up with an assessment and then some initial recommendations. There's a lot of overlap, I think, between the efforts of the EDI task force and our internal assessment. But we do have 6 focus areas, and all of this is just wrapping up. So in a lot of ways, the hard work is now starting, and we want to, make sure that we do this right. So we are having we have an internal staff group. We're going to expand that to, right now it's kind of at a high level, and we're going to get all levels of the organization working on this here into the next year. But just to summarize some of the recommendations, the 6 recommendations that's come out of this internal task force. One is to really just draft a statement that we can share with our organization that kind of defines how we want to address EDI. So we've been working on really defining a statement, which, I think those words are important. We're spending a lot of time on that. The next recommendation is to work on our policies, really do a comprehensive evaluation of all of the city's policies across the board with an EDI lens, and work on that, update those policies. The other thing is to develop a strategic plan for hiring and attracting talent that is diverse and retaining talent that is diverse. So really looking at our human resource policy. So we have a separate policy on that, or a separate goal on that. Really looking at how we celebrate different differences within the organization. So finding ways to have celebrations that are more broad than we typically do, and be sensitive to everybody in the organization and all of the diversity that we want to bring in. The next thing is to create kind of a process that's ongoing for dialogue and listening sessions, so we don't just do this once. How are we going to bring this into our organization and really make it part of our institution, so that we continue to do this and continue to get feedback and continue to work on this. And then I think that was 5. And then the other one is education and training. So really look at our education and training and staff training programs and see how we can improve that as well. So those are the 6 areas of focus that came out of our organizational assessment that we're going to be working on.
Great. We have 4 presentations this evening, so I'm thinking maybe we just open it up to question and answer now, and go after each presentation. That way the questions are fresh and we don't get folks confused. If there are any questions for Louisville, thoughts, asks for help? Devin?
Yeah, Kyle,
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Devin.
Go for it, Holly.
Oh, okay. Simple one. Kyle, I'm wondering if you would share the name of the consultant that you used for the task force. I'd really appreciate that.
You bet. His name is Anthony Graves, and he had a colleague whose name was Emily. What was Rob? What was her last name? Shamsuddin. Is that right?
Dean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not
thank you.
sure, but I did put a link in the chat to the final report that has Graves Civic Solutions, and then ESD Consulting was the sub-consultant. So
Yeah,
there should be information in there.
Shamsuddin.
Awesome.
Shamsuddin is her name. Yeah, they were really excellent, Holly. I would highly recommend them. They did a really
Great.
great
Thank
job.
you so much. I appreciate it.
great. Devin?
Yeah, I was going to ask this of every presentation tonight, just getting a feeling for how your community has responded to doing this work in your community, and after kind of some results have come out, such as this task force presentation, what was the kind of response from the community, both good, bad, indifferent, all of it?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a really good question. I think work like this is always is never without critics, but I would say on the whole, the community has been very supportive. What I hear from my constituents is that they're really happy that we are doing this work, and then they want to be supportive. There are folks who are have different ideas, but I don't think that reflects the broader community. I also think there's a bit of a difference in the way some folks approach this issue. I know that when I was growing up, the focus was really on equality, and now we talk a lot more about equity, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we've come beyond with like everybody's treated as equal, as opposed to we need to help provide what everybody needs to be successful. And I think that kind of a shift is and sort of the evolution of thinking around equity and diversity and inclusion is one that we need to do a better job in working with our constituents on, and helping folks understand kind of how it's not just something that we like don't talk about anymore, that we actually want to be mindful and have in this we've said with our consultants, in other words, that when we were designing and choosing people for the task force, that we were going to take a race forward approach and really try to make that task force representative. And I think that's different than maybe we would have approached a similar task force even 30 years ago, something like that.
Great. Any other questions for Louisville? You can always throw something in the chat to either Kyle or Rob, I'm sure. Great, thank you all. Erie, I've got you up next.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see this?
Yep.
Great. Well, I'm going to do my best to keep it short and sweet. And I also just want to state that I'm speaking from the point of view of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager, who is me. And I have been with the town of Erie since October. So my experience with the town has been very limited, and I will speak from that point. So I just went ahead and wanted to just share some of the points of discussion that were prompted for the agenda. And so how and in what realms is Erie practicing the work of equity? Well, the work of Erie is trying to be intersectional, and it's really not only trying to address it within the community, but also within the spaces that primarily work for governance. So internally, it's really looking into embedding equity into governance, really looking into what systems are currently in place, how we operate, looking into not only the programmatic, but also the systemic approaches that have led to have Erie the way that it is, and really evaluating that from a critical lens, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, really evaluating the voices of who has been and who has not been part of the conversation. Personally, it's also really engaging into conversations, beginning to normalize the discussion about equity, why this matters, why the town of Erie is committing to doing this work, and how we can provide with each employee the ownership to understand why this work matters and where do they fit into this work, why this is necessary to be the best public servants that can be services that for residents need based on their experiences. And lastly, is externally supporting and uplifting community efforts. We do have several community organizations, and we also have community champions that are passionate about leading events, for instance, Juneteenth, Pride Month, and several of those celebrations that took place this past year were organized by nonprofits. To name some of them, one of the ones that comes from the top of my head is Being Better Neighbors. And they have been excellent at really advocating from a community standpoint, but also we have the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board, which is closely working not only with staff, but also helping provide insights to the Board of Trustees as to how to look into issues that matter to the community and really evaluate that from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. In what realms do we need to be working, given that this is such new work? Technically, the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion truly started in the mid to late 2020 for the town of Erie. And from my perspective, we need to continue working on development for staff, the community, and that means normalizing equity. That means that we need to have a unified message to share what it means to practice and to advocate and to do equity and DEI efforts in the town of Erie, and making sure that we have systems in place that keep us in a way and in the direction that is in the best interest of this work. Unison in messaging, as I was saying before, really understanding where we all stand with this work, because oftentimes we can have different definitions of where the end goal is and how we get there. And so this is very important to make sure that we all understand how to take this work and how we can communicate about performing and conducting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also finding ways to establish commitment, making sure that we explain it, we create those relationships not only within staff, but also with the community and all constituents to provide the best way that we all take ownership into this type of work. What other opportunities are there to support community efforts beyond, oh, my bad, beyond Erie? It is definitely defining collectively within the consortium of cities and beyond what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, what it really means to do equitable work, what impacts do equitable work in municipalities has also, and in Boulder County, in the Denver metro area, in our extended communities, because ultimately we're interconnected. What happens in the city can also have impacts in other municipalities. And really understanding what resources that we have, celebrating the resources and the richness that is already there, but making sure that we hone into these resources and making sure that we find the pathways to distribute them to the people that need it most. It could be their government officials, it could be institutions, it could also be just community members, and strengthening their community of practice. I will say that for me, one of the most integral parts of this work has been connecting with other municipalities as we're doing right now. And I will say that I have been privileged to have the opportunity to connect with some people in this call and some other people that are not also in this call to really understand where we stand with this work. And we should not try to invent a wheel when it already exists, especially if we can do synchronized efforts and really making sure that we're all on the same page and that this work is hard, but we're all together trying to do this work. Just to give a quick highlight of some of the milestones that the town of Erie has accomplished over the past year. The first thing that the town really enacted was the creation of an advisory board. And since fall of 2020, these people have set out bylaws, they have set out objectives. They also work with a consultant, and her name is Dr. Darlene Sampson. And she was also a pivotal part in creating the guidelines for not only the hiring of the position that I'm currently in, but also the questions and providing long-term items for the town of Erie to consider, not only at the staff level, but at the community level, and how each department can take actions to really make sure that we're intersecting equity work with any other function of governance. Outside of that, in fall of 2021, I started this work, and it has been nothing but exciting and nourishing. And as I quickly started, I also wanted to make sure that I developed a network, to make sure that people know that Erie is committed to this work and that this work cannot be just done by Erie alone. So we have joined networks such as the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, but also I have networked with the Colorado DEI Network, which is a more informal yet very solid way to connect with other practitioners across the Denver regional area. And we also have opportunities to connect with community members such as the Consortium of Cities, but also with the Climate Justice Collaborative, which I'm part of. The list goes on and on. It's just really building and strengthening that community of practice from the very beginning to make sure that we have a good set of ideas and a good way to keep us in check as we're doing this work. And another thing that I want to highlight is that senior staff, particularly, or top leadership, along with the Board of Trustees, underwent several trainings in which we had the chance to really, at a glance, understand what it means to do equity work and DEI work and what that means for the town of Erie and how we can achieve that. And Dr. Darlene Sampson really honed into that and really helped us envision that as leadership and understanding how we fit into this conversation. Some of the projects that are coming up for 2022, and this is all part of the greater DEI plan for the town of Erie, which is currently in the works. But one of the big things that I want to, as a big goal that I have set, is to develop a comprehensive and ever-evolving curriculum around what it means to do equity work in the town of Erie as public servants, and also understanding bias and microaggression. This work will be done with Dr. Carolyn Love from Kebaya Consulting. And the model that we have adopted is very similar to what the city of Boulder has done, which is train the trainer. And it will be a way to also engage staff from the very beginning to understand what it is that the staff needs and how and what approach do we need to also address talking about these conversations and really making sure that we're investing in staff for them to model this behavior, for them to be leaders within their departments, and to also make sure that over the long term, they're able to share this with the rest of staff, creating a massive effect to ensure that everybody's having the same conversation, the same skills. With that, also internally, we're working on a DEI plan, which is going to be the major document guiding in detail what diversity, inclusion, and equity will mean for the town of Erie, but also creating a unified messaging, which then will help us have a unison and then applying the DEI lens across all facets of governance. So some of the things that are coming up and are actually in the works now is an inclusionary housing policy for the town of Erie, planning and development projects such as affordable housing, but also potentially the comprehensive plan that is yet to be determined, hiring practices and recruitment, and how we do the screening process within HR to make sure that we are having the most diversity from the very beginning as we're sending out a job application, and how we're recognizing our biases as we're looking into candidates. Also, recruitment for boards and commissions, ensuring that there's clarity and transparency for anyone that is willing to do a volunteer-based advisory board, and making sure that they have the resources that they need to be successful and to navigate government, and also doing each individual departmental work. So understanding how each function of government, as I said before, intersects with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And supporting the community through collaboration and events. Again, we want to make sure that the community has its independence to really express how they want to talk about these issues, and we want to be there for them and be a resource and make sure that we're also elevating that conversation within staff. I know that was a mouthful, and I know that there was a lot to share, but I thank you all for your time, and I welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Alberto. Who has some questions? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alberto, can you tell me, where do you, who do you report to in your staffing structure?
Thank you for the question. I currently report to the Deputy Town Administrator, which is Melissa Wiley.
Okay, so you're sort of housed within the administrator's office? Is
correct?
That, okay, thank you.
I think I just wanted, as a trustee, one of the things I wanted to reiterate was when I was elected in April of last year, several others were as well. During our first couple of meetings that we had, from a high level perspective, was we all agreed that DEI was a primary importance that we wanted to put on our work plan. And so we identified it as a priority. We had, I think, over 50 or 60 items that we had identified, narrowed it down to 29, and DEI was up in the top, I think, 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. I'm remembering my facts. But we felt it was, from a trustee perspective, to go forward with this in light of everything, obviously, that has happened, but more so in the fact that Erie, as we all know, like all of our other communities, is growing rapidly, and it's growing rapidly with people from all different parts of the world that are moving to Colorado and moving to our communities. I live in a development here in Erie that is very diverse, but is an unusual island in Erie in regard to that diversity. And so I'm happy to be in it. We have residents that walk down the street with burqas on. We have a large contingent of the community that's from India, Pakistan, and others that have come to seek a better life. And so we all felt it was important to put this on the docket as something that we need to do. We recognize that putting up a DEI board, advisory board was important to get that going. We ran into some challenges initially with that, which Alberto is very knows well. And we made our mistakes along the way, but we owned up to them. And I think that transparency is what's important. There may have been feelings that have been rubbed the wrong way, which is fully understandable. But we knew that it was going to be challenging. And especially in a community that's, 96% white, if I remember correctly as well, it's a challenge. And trying to get the community on board with that. And that's where we felt that getting that DEI advisory board up and working the way it should, and then also allocating, decision to allocate money towards a DEI manager was key to trying to get things on track the way that they should be on track. We recognize full well, as from a humility standpoint, that we are not experts on it, and neither was our administration that we have at the staff level. And so we felt it was very important to have that fully resourced and funded. And so that was a priority. So I think from a takeaway is to think about those things when you are trying to stand something like this up. You are going to run into challenges, but your values, you lead with your values, things, and your budget reflects your values. We all hear that. And I think that it's very important that you make those two, marry those two together, because DEI does intersect in everything that it is that we do. We may not have thought about it before, but we're rapidly changing. And I think that if we all have probably opined on our own about the dissension and anger that's out in the world and in our country, and a lot of it has to do with the pace of change and how fast that's moving. And so the ability to have the tools available to affect that change in a positive way is very important for each of our communities to do, because it's not always going to be this way. It's going to change rapidly over time. And I think the biggest challenge that we here in Erie have, and Alberto can speak more to it than I, is really trying to bring the community on board. And that is in such a community that is broken down among political lines, literally along County Line Road, Weld County on one side, Boulder County on the other. And we've been in articles about that at the national level and as to the local level. And so I think those challenges come into play. And so I think it's very important that the board be very strong and or city council be very strong in what their desires and goals. But more importantly, I think for Alberto, trying to stress is practically, what does this mean at the ground level? What does this look like? What does progress look like? Incremental progress. Where do we see things starting to come together? And we recognize it's going to take some time. And the last thing I'll say is that we have a transition coming up in April where 3 of our board members are term limited. So we're going to have 3 new board members. So to bring them on board is going to be key to ensuring that those values are kept going. And as always, I don't know if bite's the word, but to keep pushing it forward. And so I think from the board perspective is we're very committed in doing it. And we're glad to have Alberto on board and working with our deputy town administrator and other staff members to really get this going. I'll say one more thing. Communication is inherently important, extremely important for your community. Your ability to have a communication plan, to have the right people and the resources. In our case, we have Gabby Ray, who we've hired, which we also budgeted last year to bring her on board because it was key to have that communication side and the expertise to be able to have a message that is clear, concise, and sets expectations for what DEI means and how it's going to go forward. So those are the areas that I think provide kind of the secret sauce, hopefully, to get to where we need to. But if you ever need a resource, offer up Alberto. He has a pretty good understanding of things if you have to ask him questions. Thank you. That's all I need to say.
Thank you, Trustee Harrison.
Great, thank you for that. Councilmember Schaaf, I saw a hand up, but I don't know if you still wanted to bring that question forward. You're welcome to.
Yeah, Trustee Harrison pretty much answered my question, which got me thinking, and so I'll just put it out there. But it's just, you talked about how important it is to, have staff get council to, the elected officials to kind of be on the same page. One of the things that we've struggled with is we stood this up last year, is while we had all of our elected officials saying, yeah, we're in support of this, it kind of got down to the how to. That was the thing that really got in the way. Some people said, this is how we should do it. Others said, this is how we should do it. So how did you kind of get over that hurdle of getting everybody to kind of agree on the how to?
I may speak primarily from the staff side. It is currently work in progress, and it really depends on each of the specific subjects that we're touching with DEI, given that DEI is not just one thing, it is many things, and it applies to everything. So my process as of now is just really just to build that understanding, build that relationship with individuals to really understand where they stand, what their understanding is of this work. And once we have gone through that process, which I have called the listening, to really making sure that we open up the space for listening, to making sure that we are taking this slow enough, really trying to strive away from that mentality of let's just check the box, let's just keep going with this mentality, with this just like put it out the door, and really understanding why this matters. What are the precedents? What is the history behind our current situation? And as we're embarking onto that, really allowing for people to have that reflection. And once we have that foundation of knowledge, then that is when we come to build consensus.
And I think from a trustee perspective, I mean, what Alberto is saying, it is a work in progress. And obviously he's come on board in October. I don't expect him to work magic and have everything working tomorrow. And he fully knows that. And I think it comes down to setting expectations and where the benefits of DEI come into play for a community. And how do we communicate that in such a way that it makes practical sense for people to see it? I think that's always the challenge. And so I think it's going to be, Alberto, more than likely, he knows how to go about it. My expectation as a trustee and others on the board is that we hired him and others for a reason to get to that point. Our realistic expectation is it's going to take time. He told us that from the very beginning, that is something that's going to take time, and it's evolutionary in its growth. So I think from our perspective of leadership is we have made it very clear to all of the heads of our departments how important this is by putting it and ranking it as high as we have in our work plan, number one. They understand that. We've made very clear, me probably, and Trustee Laughlin and some others probably have made it very clear that this is key. I think, the stumbles that we had at the beginning were learning opportunities on how to move forward. And so we understood that. And so I think once we get the leadership on board at those different department levels, they will in turn also filter that down to their different groups. But it has to have a strategic plan and as well as a tactical plan to put that in place. So we as a trustee board, the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Advisory Board comes before us with reports. We read those reports, we actually do. And we have, questions to ask and expectations that we want to see. And so I think that's one way to try to get the how filtered down at that level. And so I think that, and if anything does come up that, for instance, that's an issue, we as a board want to hear about it. If it's something that needs to be fixed not knowing about it doesn't help. And so we're very open about that. And so we would like to see that more. I'm sure that Alberta would like to see it more quickly and sure I would as well. But we're going to get there. And so I think once that plan is into place, I would say that it's probably going to be a living plan that changes and with time and reflects changing environments and influences to that. But we'll roll with it and we'll put it into practice.
Great. Thank you, Ari. And again, I'm sure if you put any other questions in the chat for those presenters, they'd be happy to respond or send you some resources, etc. I am watching the time. So first I want to make sure, Taylor, give you a quick opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we will take our break as we always do, and then come back for those last two presentations. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. Apologies for the delay, everybody. Taylor Ryman, City of Boulder. And I'm glad to be joining this conversation.
Thanks for jumping in with us. So it is 7:32. We take a 5-minute break. So if you need to stretch or fill up a glass or whatever it might be, this is your opportunity. And then we will be hearing on community equity from both the City of Boulder and then Boulder County in maybe around 10-minute or so presentations, again with question and answer opportunities after that. And then you can start brainstorming in your break if you'd like to, and thoughts around what topics do we want to cover in 2022. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everybody. We'll finish up with tonight's presentations. We have on the topic of community equity, City of Boulder, and then Boulder County.
All right, thank you. Again, Ryan Hanchin here, engagement specialist with the City of Boulder, with my colleague here, Ana Silvia, and I will go ahead and pull up some slides here.
Great. Looks good.
Okay. Sylvia, I'll pass it over to you.
Oh, sorry about that. That was like the quickest 5 minutes to put kiddos to bed. It was wonderful. Excuse, you have to go to bed. So we're from the City of Boulder, here to present to you just on some of the efforts and work that is going on with the city, where we're at and where we're going, and hopefully we can share some insights. Give you some background. I'm sure, a lot of us know Boulder is a predominantly white community. There's communities of color within there. It's also, we know, a very wealthy community, which also creates quite a bit of socioeconomic disparities that exist currently. We wanted to point out to this racial dot map that I think if you've never played around with this is going to be your new kind of tool for the next week. Have fun with it. You can just literally Google racial dot map, and it's provided and it's been created by the University of Virginia, and it's specifically to delineate the by race, and it's based on census data, who lives and who identifies within city across the United States. And so a couple of key points we know, for example, in 2015, some of the disparities, unfortunately, that currently still exist. The median income for Latinx city residents was around $33,000 a year, whereas for white families, the median income was $113,000. Right? So we know of those disparities that exist. I do want to caution sometimes with this kind of information or data that it doesn't mean that every family of color, right, every Latinx family who lives in Boulder is a person who lives in poverty. But for the most part speaking, those families who are perhaps families of color, Latinx families who maybe are on that higher medium income spectrum are few and far between. We know, for example, the high school graduation rates for white city students currently is at 93.8% versus compared to Latinx students at 77%. And so with this information and other data points that the city has access to, we are able to create programs and policies and really shape things to serve that community. Not that we wouldn't serve our other counterparts or the wealthier community, but that certain things that we do is really with the focus on prioritizing these communities. And so how we do kind of what the city focuses on, if you go into the next slide, Ryan, the city is really focused on the addressing institutional racism. We do know, right, that there's multiple structures, including individual, institutional, and structural, that really work together to create all forms of oppression and racism that currently exist. And so we know that all of these need to be addressed. However, for us, one of the main focus is to address the institution. And that means with really navigating and really understanding what are the policies we currently have in place? What are the practices that we carry across departments? And what are the things that we really need to take a look at deeper to address inequities that exist today? I'll explain later some of the things that we do through trainings and on how we actually are doing that. I know, Alberto, you mentioned, if you go to the next slide, partnering with GARE, Government Alliance for Racial Equity. City of Boulder also is partnering with GARE, and we've been partnering with them since the beginning of this journey. This network has really been instrumental in addressing and really setting up a framework that can really be sustainable and can really carry the city forward, and not just kind of I heard it right, this work, we all know it's not just a checklist, and it should never be considered as a checklist. If we ever think about it that way, then we might as well not do anything, because lenses and a checklist can be very easily erased or removed versus a framework that's just deeply embedded within everything that we do. It just ensures that any policies and practices are really sustainable, whoever comes across into the organization. And so that's really important, and something that we're working individually with departments to make sure that gets established. I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Thank you. We wanted to include a real brief overview of the city's racial equity plan. I'll drop the full version here in chat, where there's an extended logic model in there, but just wanted to cover high level here. This was a plan that was unanimously adopted by council this year in February, and is the city's first ever racial equity plan. And really co-developed with the community, and beginning with a community perceptions survey in 2017, and then really building off of a lot of engagement with community over the years, and beginning in 2019, came back to community organizations and community partners, and really said, this is what we have heard over the years, and we want to make sure that this is resonating and what needs to be expanded in this plan before gathering feedback and input on this plan and sharing with council, and was adopted, as I said, this February. So a few parts of this plan to include, right? So, the first one is really setting that foundation, is really making sure that we are normalizing, that we are operationalizing, and really increasing the understanding of institutional and structural racism among staff and all volunteers, all boards and commissioners, all elected officials. As Sylvia mentioned, a big part of this is racial equity training. Also, workplace-based equity teams, really making sure that leadership is centering equity within decisions. The second one here is really ending racial disparities in city services. And a huge piece of this is bringing in the city's racial equity instrument. And so in partnership with GARE, developed a 6-step racial equity instrument that any policies or decisions or programs, budgets can be put through that instrument to really look at who is bearing the benefit of that program or decision, who is bearing the burden, what those unintended consequences may be, and really ensuring that racial equity is woven into master and strategic planning processes, as well as city budget. This next goal recognizes that the city cannot do this work alone. Certainly there are many things the city needs to focus on within our own house, but recognizing that there are many, many partners and community organizations that are already doing this work very well, and to make sure that we're amplifying that work and partnering with that work to build the capacity of community organizations as well as ourselves, and recognizing the history of institutional racism within the city of Boulder. The next piece here is really around inclusive engagement and looking at how can we make sure that we're expanding the influence of community members of color in improving access to decision makers, really focusing on high quality community engagement that is culturally relevant and that values lived experience. We found a big piece of this is ensuring that decisions, the city is putting together quantitative data and qualitative data in making those decisions. And recognizing that there are many barriers to community engagement throughout our processes, and working closely with community members to dismantle those barriers and create new processes. And the last one here, really looking at a diverse workforce across the entire depth and breadth of our organization. And ensuring that that includes boards and commissions, as well as the city's own workforce. And so I'll pass it back here for some more tangible examples.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. So some of I would say these racial equity trainings are a huge part of our core and what we do at the city, and have been incredibly instrumental at getting everybody on board. And we currently have 3 trainings: Advancing Racial Equity, the Role of Government, Racial Equity Instrument, Intro and Best Practices, and Bias and Microaggression workshops or training. This is a 2-part workshop. The first 2 are models that come directly from GARE, and that over the years, the staff that who trains, we've just adapted and kind of molded those trainings a little bit to suit and to speak directly to the city of Boulder and departments to make it a little bit more familiar and intentional. And so those are, for example, the role of government so far, since we started it, we've have 679 employees who have completed the training. And this is a mandatory training for all supervisors, for all city supervisors, new employees, and council members. And I know, Lauren, you coming in on board, congratulations. We're working towards scheduling for new council members taking all of these trainings. This first training, the role of government, it really is an incredible foundation to really talk about like terminology. What does it mean to have explicit and implicit biases? What does it mean to be part of an institution as an individual and actually address racism within that institution? Even when people think, gosh, I'm just an administrator. I just take people's, water bills. I don't really have much influence. Well, there's influence in every pocket of our institutions. And so being able to, at least for me as a trainer, for employees and colleagues to really see that power of influence that they can have over the programs and policies that they really oversee. The racial equity instrument, as Ryan mentioned, is really a tool. So far, we've had 191 city staff that completed the training. And this is a tool that is developed to make sure that any new program or policy or existing programs and policies do not continue to create inequities within the city, and do not, by unintentional, we also perpetuate racism across the city, right? And things have come up, at least for the, when we got into COVID, there was a rapid response assessment tool that got created with 4 questions, because people, all of us, right, just needed to respond in a very emergency manner and quite quickly. But we wanted to make sure that any decision, especially during COVID, was not going to add any extra burden to families who were already being even heavily more impacted. And so it was a super simple 4-question kind of sheet where individuals who were thinking about creating a new program or setting up a new outreach structure really went through that to deeply think about communities that are often disenfranchised. And then the bias and microaggression workshop, so far 408 individuals have taken this training, including council members. And these trainings were created in collaboration with Kabaya Consulting and Circle organization. Amazing groups that came together to create the RFP process and apply for the city's RFP. And they hosted focus groups with all of the city employees to figure out what's the culture like, what's the environment like, what's the environment like for people of color working for the city of Boulder, what do we need, what do we need to shift? And so based out of that, they created this entire workshop. It's 8 hours, so 2 4-hour sections, and it's very much a train the trainer model. So there was a group of 22 of us that went through a whole year of training with the consultant team in the content. How do we facilitate? How do we get familiar with the words, the terminology? How do we get familiar with challenging individuals or individuals who might not feel as comfortable to have these conversations, but are required to take these trainings and be okay with that, and kind of approaching it in a way that's respectful. It's with grace, but it's also, this is just part of our value system, which I really appreciate Trustee Harrison, right? Like falling back onto those values, ultimately that's what's going to drive this work. Well, 100% believe in that. And it's going really well. And so we'll continue now. The consulting team has officially stepped away. The team of us who are still remaining will continue to train new employees or new people who want to come on board as facilitators for 2022. And then to really ensure that the weight of those trainings is really held just across the city and across colleagues, and ensure that there's a mix of dynamics, right? That we have colleagues who are white and colleagues who are people of color, and ensure that while those facilitations can be really tricky, people of color can really feel supported, because it can be very triggering to give these trainings as a person of color. And so that's going really well. We've had our ups and downs, but it's been very successful, and it's created a space for colleagues to really, while they're working, separate a time for them to talk about these issues and how can they actually address it on an individual level and interpersonal level, because they represent their position as leaders, right? And so it's really moving the work forward.
Another example we wanted to highlight was the Community Connectors model. And these are amazing community members who really partner with the city in increasing trust between underrepresented community members and city government. And so they're instrumental in co-designing community engagement opportunities, really sharing resources or ways to participate in city decision-making, and making sure that the city is hearing about any pressing issues or concerns or hopes and dreams that we want to make sure are rising up from the community. And they do receive a stipend for their work and for their skills in bicultural and bilingual professionals, and their significant time and their relationships within the community for this work. Right now we've had about 24 community connectors who have been part of the model, and a few examples of recent projects here. All 4 of the kind of citywide master planning processes that are moving forward in the city now have at least 2 community connectors who are involved, from the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan to reimagining policing, comprehensive flood and stormwater, and the Parks and Rec Master Plan. Quickly, emergency response connectors, and we had a team of folks launched in March 2020, really making sure that folks had access to accurate and timely COVID information and basic needs resources, and a way to again, surface those issues and make sure the city was understanding the needs of community members that much quicker. Our last team here, Community Connectors and Residents, was launched in the past year and has really been integral in raising community issues and priorities to council members, and as part of influencing council priorities coming into biannual council retreat. And we wanted to open up for any questions. And let me pull down our slides here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you both for presenting. Who's got questions for the City of Boulder on their equity work? Alberto?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. A curiosity that I have is how internally did you move away from the checklist mentality into really making this a process, understanding that this is a journey and how people fit into this conversation?
It's a great question. So to also put things in perspective, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ryan has been one of the core participants. Since we partnered with Garrett, that was almost 4 years ago. So we've really been on this journey for almost 4 years, right? I would say even the first 2 years, there was very little traction because it was just normalizing that we were just going to start this work and letting people know, hey, this is important to us. This is a value. We're going to start these trainings. As far as for me as a perspective, so I was a social worker for 10 years. And I came into this work and what I do now from that perspective, because I noticed that as a city employee, I had very little influence or impact in some of the policies that I would help the families that I supported navigate the system. And I became really frustrated with that. And so I left social work and came into this position to kind of infiltrate leadership, for lack of a better word, to see how we can really bring more people along and people of color with lived experiences. And so for me as a staff, I would say the last 2 years, having leadership support and their buy-in, and I don't even quite call it buy-in, their commitment with, for example, the Amy Kane, who is the equity officer, really talking to leaders and getting them on board to say, we want everybody to be trained in the role of government. That was a very first initial step. It gave everybody the foundation that government was going to start talking about race and racism and how the experiences of some of our colleagues within the city weren't actually the same as our white colleagues and why that was happening. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Ryan, with that.
Just to add that we have an awful long way to go. You know, I feel like we're on the right trajectory, but there's an awful lot of work that's ahead of us.
If I may, I do have a follow-up question to that. Given that you've been in this journey for more than 3 years and we're just starting, and yet we're already, in my experience, I'm already seeing people just want to see results right away. How do you counter that narrative? How do you tell people that this is not just about results, about getting them out of the door?
For me, I've always gone in, we've had conversations with colleagues, but that is very much rooted and embedded into white guilt. We want to see results because we feel guilty, because we know, right, there's this reckoning across the nation, thankfully, and it's been also very painful. But with that, there's a discomfort that happens that people just want to, let's just fix it. I no longer want to be uncomfortable with race. So what do I need to do to fix it? And I think with that, I've always told individuals and colleagues and leaders who have had a chance to talk to is, if you're going to do something, we're going to do something, is because we're going to do it with intention, not because it's going to be the quickest, fastest thing. If we think it's going to be the quickest, fastest thing, we're going to fail. And in the meantime, we're going to hurt a lot of people of color, a lot of our LGBTQ community. You know, we're going to have unintentional consequences, and their repair is going to be even harder. And so I always go back to, let's just slow down. Let's think this through. Let's bring other voices in. So when it comes to creating, say, a new training, is whose voice is missing in the decision-making table. So how many people of color in Erie are whose voice we need to hear about their perspective on what's it like working in Erie, right? Are people who live in Erie, and counteracting the, referring them back to resources like the White Fragility book is great. It's a great book that talks about that. By race, right, by Ijeoma Oluo. In terms of housing, there's red, oh, it's next to my bed, but it's about lining.
Red, the color of law.
Color of
The
law.
color of law, thank you. Yeah. So it's referring people back to resources, at least on how I approached this work most of the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see a couple other hands and I missed the order, so you all be. Sit, Councilmember Brown.
Hey, Kyle. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Trustee. My question was about you talked about the tool that you use to evaluate all policies in Boulder. Did I get that right?
That is the goal.
From an equity lens. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is that tool available? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the goal, like if I correct me if I'm wrong, right? The goal is equity in all policies to some degree, right? You're looking at everything from an equity lens. And so how, as a smaller city, how I'm very interested in sort of how we would do that and how we would adapt that to our processes.
I love that. And I will actually pass it on to Ryan because he's the trainer for that training.
Great.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And first off, that's the goal eventually. We're not there now. We do have regular trainings on the racial equity instrument, and we'd be happy to extend that offer to anyone who wants to participate. And then we have another one coming up, I want to say December 12th, but
December 12th.
Okay, perfect. I'll drop my contact info in here. If there are staff who want to participate or others. But it is mentioned a 6-step process that really looks at who is impacted by decisions. How can we make sure that their voices are brought in and included in those decisions, and really looking at how that outcome will be impacting community members. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And I would say also, Ryan, right, that some of those we've gotten commitment from for example, the finance team that any kind of new major, for example, for ARPA funding, that is a given that we have their commitments that any kind of program or decision making around how ARPA funds will be spent, apart from obtaining feedback from individuals of what they think their priorities should be, all of those decisions will be put through this instrument, so that at the end, when the final decision that does come through, is those decisions are not going to have those unintended consequences and create more harm than good. So that's one example.
Thank you very much.
Great. Trustee Harrison, did you have
Thank
a question
you.
as well? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna lower my hand there. I think, for the environment, it's always, I'm in the IT world. I've probably been in it longer than I should. Not an IT person by birth by any stretch, but I think one of the things that is a challenge for what we're trying to accomplish is the ability to assess progress. What does that look like in its incremental stages where we are as a town here in Erie, work that we're starting to undergo, and where you all are today in Boulder for, you've been on this for 4 years. What does progress look like for our citizens and our residents when they ask the question, number one, well, why do the question I hear in Erie is, well, why do we need to do this? 96% white. Why do we care about a minority?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here going, well, okay, I'll take your question with grace. But having been a military brat and lived in different places, the ability to have diversity is a huge thing that is of value for anybody, to be able to see through a different lens. But, I think that's the big thing is overcoming that right off the bat. How do we overcome that at an incremental level and try to sustain it? And then number two, how do we measure that progress? Obviously, it's not in the IT world, it's data and You know, they talk about, you know, you have something that spits out something and you can see your sales growth or something like that. How do we as a community kind of assess what that progress is for our residents and for our community? You know, yes, you can say, hey, 500 people have gone through training. That's wonderful. But are they using and leveraging that training and what they're doing in their day-to-day life? So how do we do that? How do you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, we actually do have data that we didn't put it in our presentation for you, but now I wish we would have. Of measuring, like we did, yeah, we also wanted to measure, and we can see who's being impacted. Are people actually gathering? There's a couple of questions that we have after the bias and microaggression training, or the role of government through the city has the program Form Stack, where we just created a very quick 7 question, 7 or 5, where it gets to very deep of, before this training, I knew about racial equity, strongly agree, disagree, right? Because of this training, I feel impacted or moved to advance racial equity within the city. You know, and so what we're seeing is there is a trend of 86% feeling like they feel prepared enough to have a conversation about race internally, and then potentially with other members outside of, with residents. I would say before you would address the outside, the community, you have to address whatever internal and with your people who work there. You will get pushback, including people. I can personally speak to that. I gave pushback because in the first 2 years as a Latina working for the city, I had no idea that the city was moving towards this. And so I'm like, this is my calling. I love this work. I see it as important, but how come me as a person of color am feeling really left out of the loop with this, the city of Boulder, right? So that was a pushback. And so what the officer at that, well, Amy Kane did, I was like, oh, oops, okay, let's fix this. And so one of the things I know the city did, and that's how Ryan came on board, it was putting a call out for a core team, racial equity core team. And we have 2, racial equity core team 1.0 and 2.0. And those are just internal city staff that it was created. I remember filling this quick kind of survey of a 3-question of who are you? What's your position? Why are you interested in this work? Why do you want to participate? And it was employees coming together to want to advance this work. So coming alongside of you, Alberto, right? Because this is a one position, you have your one position, but it can never be a one position show. It has to be a collective of people. And that has to come from support from leadership to support that other staff members are going to take maybe 10 hours a month out of their regular duties to really focus on this. And I think what has helped with the city of Boulder, at least for me, is really hearing about it and constantly hearing leadership talk about racial equity. Why is this important? Hearing council talk about it, hearing your constituents come to, council meetings and say, this is important to me and here's why. It takes a lot of brave space to do that, because if you tell me I'm a person of color, right, Erie's 96% white, I'm like, no, I'm not going to speak. That is red flags. I'll get attacked, right? But what is city internal staff doing to create that safety net for people to express, like focus groups? I know that was hugely valuable when we were creating the bias and microaggressions, that it was open to everyone in the city if they wanted to participate or not. And it was super valuable because it was the first time where at least people of color really felt heard, and maybe in other groups as well. So that could be one. Ryan?
Just, yeah, one thing to add before I know we're getting to the county here in a minute. I think a huge piece of that is data collection, and really recognizing that in many cases, like the city does not have a great baseline for data, really, especially data that is disaggregated by race. And so, when we talk about, ending disparities in city services, we really need to make sure that we are digging into that data more deeply, that we are collecting it in all the right places, that we're able to share and analyze that data. But even just to have a baseline is something that we're still working towards.
And I would also say putting the monetary resources for that. Right? So approving that whoever has the power to approve those finances actually says, we will allocate this much towards a position, or the person within IT who already exists, they'll allocate 20 hours a month to really focus on racial equity data. And sometimes I think a lot of what we hear is we don't have the resources. Well, we make the resources. If this is really important, we'll make room to advance it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's great conversation and good questions. And I'm trying to watch the clock and make sure that I honor my statement for you all of we'll be done before 8:30. So Boulder County is the last group just to talk about racial equity and the work that's being done at the county. And so I'm going to be super brief, and mostly because I really want to get some opportunity for brainstorm around topics for 2022 before we finish this evening. So thank you, Mark. Mark virtually read my mind, which I appreciate so much. So we have a lot of different initiatives, a lot of work being done at Boulder County in regards to racial equity. It's one of our strategic priorities under equity and justice. And I only chose a couple of them because I felt like, what would be most helpful? What might there be some dialogue about? What could we maybe have some, conversation about? And I also will share the same thing that I talk to when I'm out in community, when folks are asking, I'm in a very unique position to talk about equity, transformational racial equity, and or just EDI, being the first person of color, the first Latina, the first immigrant in this role. And what I tell people is the Boulder County, as the 2,100 employee organization, did not hire me. The organization didn't say we want or are ready for a woman of color to come in and lead an organization as one of 3 CEOs. The voters did. And so I say that, and I start this conversation with that because this is a really unique position to be in. And there's a lot of responsibility, and a few folks have touched on, what does that really mean for those of us who are people of color to have conversations, to ask the questions, to give the pushback, to be deemed, to be perceived as fill in the blank in these conversations around racial equity. And so the first few months for me was really having conversations with virtually as many people as I could to understand the background of work around what started out as culturally responsive, that started out as diversity work, that started out of, as methods and terminology and academia changes over the years, over the last about 6 years at the county, to get us to the point where we are right now. And so my question really was what some of you all have talked about is Boulder County as an organization ready to be doing equity work outside of our own organization? And I would argue that we're not. And I say that based on my own personal experience, based on meeting with staff in all different positions, departments, and areas around the county, that we have internal work to do. And every organization I've ever led, every board that I've been on, in every sector of industry that I've been in doing consulting work, I've asked the same questions. And so that one of the pieces that we've started, that the board was able to, after my working on having these conversations, where are we really? What are we really ready to do? Are we ready to talk about, as some of you shared your data, are we even talking about whiteness? How are we framing this conversation? And so if we're not there yet, then I would argue that we still need to focus internally. And so one of the big decisions for us in 2021 was to begin the Office of Racial Equity and doing some of the same pieces that you all are talking about. And so we've allocated about $400,000. Our hope was to have this office going this year and have a director. So just to put that out there on the street, we will be hiring right now. We're in the process of getting a different HR firm to bring on some other executive leadership positions, but this will be the first one to hopefully get out the door and on the street in January of 2022 to allow that person to build up that group, and it will start with three people in that office. So that's a significant endeavor. And it's also our response to, yes, we need to focus on policies. We need to focus on the procedures. We need to look at everything from land use to the different policies that we are using every day, including hiring policy, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So that's, just kind of a sharing of. The other thing along those lines is that we also use GARE, the Government Alliance of Racial Equity. I put the link in there. City of Boulder uses that when they're talking about the racial equity instrument, and we use the racial equity tool. Some folks call it the racial equity assessment, but it is on that website, and you can get to it for folks who had some of those questions. The City of Longmont, who wasn't able to join this evening, also uses GARE, and I think there's a benefit to even regionally be using similar plans and conversations, because then we're using the same terminology and we're talking about some of the same methods, and we're using some of the same tools, which can be really helpful for us when we just talk about the regional work and collaboration that we're doing. You can keep scrolling there, Mark, and I'll just try and keep talk quickly. One of the other practices that we do that came from GARE as well as the Racial Equity Mondays. And so when we talk about what are some of the tools, the ways that folks can have these conversations about, okay, this is an example. Here's a program that our department wants to put together. So for example, community services gets a grant and they want to look at doing outreach in community and partnering with community partners around fill in the blank rental assistance. And so this is a format that's set up so that they can get from racial equity practitioners, folks who've gone through these similar trainings that have just different names, but they're through the GARE framework, to ask those same questions. Who's going to be the most burdened? What are the real effects? What are the outcomes that we're wanting, et cetera? But that's a format that's being used within the county organization so that anybody from any department can come and get some feedback. And it could even be a job description. I'm getting ready to hire for my department, and I want to get some feedback about, am I asking the right questions to get to the outcome that's really going to be focusing on race as one of, to build interview questions as an example. So that's a practice called Racial Equity Mondays that happens. The next piece that I just want to quickly talk about is our equitable hiring tool. And I would love to hear any feedback from other folks that are looking at those types of policies. Sounded like a couple of you might be working on it soon. This inclusive hiring practice just came into be November of last year. And so we kind of began it in January of this year. And we are going to be reviewing it in January of 2022, because there's a couple pieces that I don't believe have been, kind of regionally shared. When we remove personal identifiable information, that practice, the removal of resume and cover letter for applicants, it was a practice that was deemed to make hiring more equitable. And we've got folks who are arguing, that actually removes the ability to know how diverse a candidate could be. And so it's something that was put into place last year, and we're taking a look at it this next year. So those are a couple of the tools that we're using, some of the practice that we're using. And I think for us, one of the big, really exciting commitments is the Office of Racial Equity, and that will be coming together next year to really address the nuts and bolts of what's happening within the organization. We, as you know, when I talked a little bit about the ARPA, community engagement is really a long-term vision of how the Boulder County can do community engagement in a real diverse way, with a lot of different partners and folks on the ground, and not only with consultants, but really bring on people who are going to be part of our organization to continue the commitment and responding to what communities are letting us know and hearing and asking from us as an organization. So that's super quick so that I can make sure that we have time to get to our business. But Anna, I see your hand up. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much, Martha. I guess my question to you is, because it's the county, and then there's all of us as cities, and then this new office is being created, which is super exciting. How do you see, how does support to the county and collaboration look like from a county and city perspective? So that is right, because things sometimes the county decisions really follow and lead over the city decisions. And so how does that support look like in collaboration so that we're really strong in that? And also as a person of color, right? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. I think that, to me, that's a significant question. And I say that because I heard several people talk about support. And that to me is a whole nother conversation. And I say that because I hear, well, we're supporting people of color, we're supporting, you know, we're creating supports for, and I don't know that folks who aren't actually in that lived experience can really say that. And I say that from an organizational standpoint. A lot of times as organizations, we're not actually asking what support do you need. We're using our lens and our experience to say, this is the support that a community may or may not need. And I say that in response to your question, because I think it's a bigger question that we all need to be asking. And as this office builds up, we need to, and that director, that will be part of their work, is to be going out to in our region, once we have done our internal work, to figure out what does that support look like outside of Boulder County as an organization. So really be dependent on one, how that director puts things together, but internally, we're talking about how do we fund, how do we resource, how do we appreciate, how do we value a cultural brokers within our own organization? How do we create hiring positions? Personally, for me, how do I know if there's progress or success? My leadership team, my staff leadership team, my executive leadership looks more like this phone call than it does currently. That's how we know if we've made progress. And because just having a lot of part-time contracted folks to do the hard work and the heavy lift and the evenings and the weekend work to get us to the solutions that we want is not sustainable. It's not long-term. It's not a commitment. And it's not going to change the actual dynamics of the workforce and representation for people of color in Boulder County. Alberto.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to say that personally, the racial equity Mondays for me were fundamental in really, understanding how to apply tool and governance. And I really just want to commend that, and the fact that it's continued to be sustained shows the dedication of your champions within Boulder County. But also, my other question is, as the entity that you are as a county overseeing and providing guidance for municipalities, how do you envision racial equity work at the county level also playing that similar dynamic with other municipalities that belong to the county?
Part of it, thank you. I mean, part of it is, again, I encourage folks to use something, and it doesn't have to be GARE, but that's what the county had chosen before I came in January. But when I'm in these conversations and I'm working with other municipalities and in other projects and work, when we're using the same language and we're not questioning each other's terminology and who are you talking about and what does that mean, then we can just get right to work, right? And so I think that's part of the value of it. And also the reality is we have folks moving from organization to organization, and so they can just get up and keep working. And how do we, so that to me eliminates some of the kind of barriers and the blockades of what ends up happening from organization to organization. And as the office continues and builds up, this would be a great place to just give y'all an update and let you know where we are and hear from you, and give that director an opportunity to hear what needs might be important as they build up that office.
Gracias.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks for the presentations. I don't know if we're going to make it in 6 minutes to get to our 2022 topics, but Mark's going to pull up the list for us of what we did and what I want to just so what we did at the beginning of this year is we all got together and had a conversation about what topics may have been pending, what are interests, what are your folks working on. This is an every other month 6:30 p.m. Commitment. We're planning right now to still be virtual until we know and hear otherwise. So just kind of as an FYI. We appreciate everybody making a commitment. I want to do a quick shout out just to staff, because as elected, we're 24/7, but our staff did not sign up for that. So thank you for giving that to us all tonight. These are the topics that we did this year. So I just asked Mark to bring those up so that we kind of give you an idea. The only other one that I've got a phone call about was if there's interest in bringing back the livable wage or something similar to that, because that was a previous conversation within the consortium. Other great work that's came out of the consortium is the regional housing plan, and there's other programs. We also brought up earlier this year questions around legislative response and gun legislation for our region as an example. Councilmember Brown.
Thanks, Commissioner. The only thing that I would add to this is I think we continue, as we continue to be in a public health crisis, and there are a number of other public health issues, not just not just related to the pandemic, things like the obesity epidemic, racial health disparities, things of that nature. And I would really appreciate a conversation with your public health folks, so that we could sort of work together on how our communities can support you all, but also how we can sort of give you all work together to try to address some of those things. So.
Yeah, we can put public health as a topic, as a potential topic. Who else has some ideas? I think I'm not sure who was next. I apologize. I'm not looking at everybody together. Was anybody else watching? And
Devin, go ahead, Devin. You're next.
All right, thanks. So yeah, I was thinking of the same lines as as Kyle, that we're still in this pandemic, but at some point I think that we're continuing to shift more and more into the recovery of the pandemic. And so a couple of things came up for me that the pandemic definitely highlighted. One of those was the local minimum wage, or the livable wage, and that conversation regionally. Child and senior care, when we start to look at those holes in our society, is not only is there a lack of a workforce, but also the pressures that are there on parents or caregivers for young children as well as seniors. Building equity in our budgets and in our fiscal policies, building civic participation and power. There's been this growing kind of distrust of government. So how do we build that back? And then the last one I would say is around fair contracting, and looking at our RFP processes and our contracting processes, and how do we level the playing field when we start to talk about those contracting.
Great, thank you. And I don't know if Trustee Rogan or Harrison was next.
Go ahead, go next if you want. I'll go last.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say first that I so appreciate this group. This is by far the most valuable elected group that I've had the pleasure to be a part of. So thank you everyone for a great year, and thank you, Commissioner, for convening this. Building on what Kyle was saying, I think community mental health is something important to investigate. I know that we are getting opioid settlement money to provide resource folks who are mental health professionals versus law officers to some of our calls. So I'd like to explore that further. And then I would like to keep exploring community equity. I don't know if there's precedent for having the same topic 2 years in a row, but I feel like it's an important topic to keep discussing.
We get to make the rules. Go ahead, who's next? And feel free if you have some other ideas that if I'm missing something in the chat to add them and we'll compile.
I'll go.
Okay, thanks.
Things in the chat, but I think the big thing, and to piggyback on what others have said, is the mental health issue. I think is a really big issue that I know in Erie has been, I've seen highlights of that, talking to our chief, some of the things that have happened, and whether or not they're related to the pandemic or not, I think we've all have seen what those downstream effects of the pandemic are, how people act towards each other, how kids act towards each other, especially in the schools. So probably having more engagement with the school districts would probably be something worthwhile to take a look at from the kids' perspective, and where they're at in the town. Obviously, what's happened in Michigan yesterday just sheds light on something like that. It can happen anywhere, and so I think that's something to take a look at. And the other one would probably be the economic sustainability, in the sense that in Erie, during the pandemic, we've been lucky in some regard because of the uniqueness of the demographics of our town and the fact that people have been buying online, and that helped from our tax revenue perspective for us. But that's eventually going to probably go in cycles and change. And so I think from an economic sustainability standpoint is, how do we diversify our economic base, work with each other in different municipalities to figure that out so that we can weather the storms that do come our way, of things that are not within our control. And we can't do everything, but we can certainly have a plan of attack for that. And speaking as from a project management perspective, I am that in my real life job. My suggestion to all the things that you're doing is, I would look at probably hiring somebody who is a project manager who can manage all of those, who has an understanding of that from what you're going through. I think it would be key from an organization standpoint, that it keeps things in line and it keeps them on track. And that's just a suggestion, that take it or leave it. But there are a lot of folks out there that probably would love to be able to help better our communities by offering that as something to help with.
Great, thank you. Board Member Lish.
Yes, kind of piggybacking on some of that, going from mental health to, I think, one of the negative effects, and Trustee Harrison alluded to the Michigan shooting. I think potentially circling back to gun violence prevention might be a topic that I don't know if we need to have it as a scheduled item, but maybe something that we can have kind of on deck as an ad hoc item if necessary, once we do get some of the additional information that we've been waiting on from, I know, the Colorado Attorney General and whatnot. They could help us all implement various gun-related legislation that's right for our communities. I think some coordination and timing across all of our communities would be beneficial, both from an implementation standpoint, and also if one of us goes alone, you'll be the lightning rod for all of the backlash. If we all go together, it sends a much stronger message that this is something that we as a county and all of us in this community are considering. So I don't know when the right time will be for that. I know our trustee, one of the trustees on our Superior Board is taking a lead in that area, and will certainly circulate information as he can. But yeah, Trustee Howard will certainly circulate that.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Folkert.
Thank you. So, I just want to put out my support for a bunch of what you've talked about, the mental health initiatives. I think, and, because we just had the election and we're a little bit unsure who will ultimately be a part of this from the Boulder City Council, kind of trying to feel I talked ahead of time to a couple other council members as well, but I think there's a lot of strong support also for the livable wage and bringing that up. Lish, as you mentioned, the gun violence prevention, and council member Rachel Friend, I think, is also working on kind of that timing coordination thing, and we'd like to participate in that. And then for me, sustainability and resilience, I think just we're continuing to kind of see a lot of these really climate impacts and how we're dealing with those as a community, both in prevention and outcomes.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be looking forward to see who decides to join us on this committee. So thanks for being here. Yeah,
I'm going to fight for it.
Good. Thank you. And I can't tell if those are previous hands that are up, or if there's additional questions. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna call the meeting time, and what I'm gonna ask everybody to send over to Mark this week by the end of Friday business. If there's any other topics that you want to have added in there, and maybe what I'll do is ask Mark if you can send out the list of what we do have right now tomorrow to everybody, just so y'all can do a quick review. And then if there's anything missing, then we'll get that added in a follow-up email and do a virtual voting. Earlier this year, we counted it out and we were in chat and we were on pages and all kinds of good things, but we'll just do a virtual vote and come up with our topics for 2022. And obviously the same way we did this year, if there's an emergency situation, Boulder, March 2021, then we will respond accordingly for folks who ask for regional conversations. And that's one of the reasons the consortium is doing such great work. So just to put that out there. Kyle, I just want to check in if you did still have a question or if that was a previous hand. And there may be other duties happening. So, okay. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's participated. It's a long evening, makes a long day for all of us, but this is great work. It's great conversation. I encourage you all to follow up with each other, to show up at one of the other towns events this weekend, or get somebody else out there. That's part of what we do and why we are so amazing here in Boulder County as community members, as electeds, and certainly as staff who supports all the work that we're doing by being here tonight and helping us prep and have the information on hand. So I hope everybody has a holiday season. Be well, take care of each other, and we will be in contact with you from the county's office and Mark to get that list, to get your feedback, and then get our list for agenda for 2022. Thank you all.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Have fun.